A lot of times I hear that in the conversation of like, oh, they're just such a great couple. They're so in love. Or, oh, she's just such a kind person. She's the kindest soul I know. How could this happen to her? And I really encourage you to step away from that narrative, because that narrative, the attaching of the characteristics or the qualities of someone to infertility, can be very damaging. What it does is it starts to create infertility as part of their identity when it's not that. Welcome to Her Fertility, the podcast revolutionizing the way women are supported on their fertility journey. I'm your host, Jess Tims. With years of supporting women as a fertility doula, I've seen the emotional pain caused by infertility, including my own struggle with unexplained infertility. And I always knew there had to be a better way to support women with their fertility health and healing. This is the first podcast to combine the principles of spirituality and energy healing with the research-based fertility data to support you in a way you've never seen before. You can stop feeling alone, confused, frustrated, and overwhelmed, and start finding the answers you've been looking for, because this podcast goes so much deeper than anything you can search for online. If you're ready to find a new spiritual perspective for your fertility journey, then press play. We are here to reclaim control, find clarity, and transform the fertility conversation. Welcome back to the Her Fertility podcast. I am so grateful that this episode has found you. However it has. Thank you for being here. And thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone who has tuned in and listened to some of these early episodes of the Her Fertility podcast. I've been getting messages on Instagram and when talking with clients, and you are loving the episodes, which just fills my heart so much. Thank you. It means so much that you're listening and sharing these episodes, and I cannot wait to bring you more. If you are watching this on the YouTube podcast, so watching the video podcast, you will notice that I am in a full coat and I am clutching this warm cup of coffee because I am freezing here in Southern California. It's winter, and even though we used to live in Oregon in the snow, I swear I am more cold here in Southern California in the winter than I was there in the snow, which is crazy. But the show will go on and I will get through it. Even though I'm freezing, we're going to make it happen. And today's episode is one that I wish I had when I was going through my fertility journey, because without a doubt, when you are navigating infertility, somebody will say something to you that just rubs you the wrong way. And so if you are trying to get pregnant and you've had a friend or a family member say something that was not the thing you needed to hear, then this episode is for you. Or if you are a friend or a family member to someone who is trying to get pregnant and you just don't know what to say, and you, of course, want to say something of support, then this episode is for you. Because the problem is, we want to say something. You want to say something, but we don't know what to say. We don't have a class on what to say when someone is going through something hard. We don't have a system to teach us how to support people through grief. Like, unless, of course, you're like a licensed therapist or something that has those tools. Generally speaking, we don't have those types of understandings. So it makes this a big problem. If you find yourself with a friend or a family member and they've shared with you that they are struggling to conceive, then I'm going to give you some tools today to know what to do in that situation. When somebody is coming to you, sharing with you that they are struggling with infertility, it means that they trust you enough to share that with you, and they are almost taking a risk by being very open and vulnerable with that information. And so naturally, there's a tone of gravity there in that conversation, because this is really an important conversation. So let's first understand the context in which infertility lives. Infertility is defined as not getting pregnant after a year of trying. So a couple who has been trying for a full year without any intervention or without any medical support, and they do not get pregnant within 12 months, that is considered infertility. Now, if you're over the age of 35, that time frame drops down to 6 months. This person who's sharing this information with you has likely been trying for a while. It's also none of your business to know how long somebody's been trying, but on a general kind of defining level, infertility is defined as trying for a year and not getting pregnant. So you can understand at least that there has been some time that has passed, right? Beyond that, it's up to the person sharing with you if they want to share with you how long that's been. It doesn't really matter, but you can understand that it's been some time. Another important thing to understand with the infertility conversation is that 1 in 6 people globally will experience infertility. Like 1 in 6, you can probably think of 6 friends, and one of them is statistically likely going to experience infertility. This is a bigger global problem. Infertility impacts couples worldwide. And for me, the most important thing to understand about the context of this conversation is that there is nothing about the quality of person that matters here. And here's what I mean. Infertility has nothing to do with the qualities or the characteristics of the person experiencing infertility. There's not something that they did to get infertility. There's not something that they didn't do to have or experience infertility. This is not because the couple is not in love enough. This is not because they are a bad person, right? This is also not because they're a super good person. Infertility has nothing to do with somebody's characteristics or qualities of that person. A lot of times I hear that in the conversation of like, oh, they're just such a great couple. They're so in love. Or, oh, she's just such a kind person. She's the kindest soul I know. How could this happen to her? And I really encourage you to step away from that narrative, because that narrative, the attaching of the characteristics or the qualities of someone to infertility, can be very damaging. What it does is it starts to create infertility as part of their identity when it's not that, right? Infertility is just that getting pregnant is taking longer than they would like it to. So number one thing to not do when talking to somebody about infertility is do not assign their characteristics or their qualities or their personality to infertility. Another way to say that is do not make their identity about infertility. And this bleeds into a larger conversation of how words matter and why in a lot of what I do on social media or even on my website or when I talk about fertility is I use the word fertility. I try really hard to avoid the word infertility because it can be a label that people start to identify with. And when the mind starts to tell itself that, oh, I have infertility, oh, I am infertile, the body starts to believe it. And that is why I'm really careful with how I use language. I also avoid saying trying to conceive as much as possible because the word trying means you're not achieving, and that's a whole other deep dive that we can have. But I even find myself now in this episode like cringing at how often I'm saying infertility, but I want to be clear about what we're talking about here. All to say that when you're talking with someone who is on a fertility journey, do not connect their identity with the thing. I'll share a story with you. I had a client who was defeated by the things her mother would say about her fertility journey. And so I asked her, like, can you give me some examples? And her mother putting the identity on her and would say, oh, you must not be trying hard enough, or oh, you must not love your husband enough, or oh, it's because you're too busy trying to live out your career that you can't get pregnant. And so all of those statements are things to avoid, because it's putting the person's identity in with the fertility. If you are somebody who's heard comments like that, to take this one step further, the human mind wants to make sense of all things, right? We are storytellers. It's how we make sense of the world. That client was like, well, why would my mother ever say something like that? And it's like, because your mom is trying to make sense of this situation. She's trying to make sense of the pain that she feels because her daughter is experiencing pain. And so in that, she's trying to create a story around it in her own mind. Is it the right thing to do? No, but that's what's happening. And sometimes just understanding that can help bring some more compassion into the conversation or into the relationship than was there before. The next thing I wish everyone understood was like the gravity of this conversation. So if somebody is sharing with you that they are struggling to conceive, that they are on a fertility journey, whatever that looks like, whether they've been trying for a while and it's not happening and they're working with their doctor, or maybe they're using IVF, or maybe they're adopting, using a surrogate, whatever their journey is bringing them, the most important thing for you to understand as the listener is the gravity of this, and not to dismiss what they are telling you. And this is such a common reaction because we do not do well with heavy emotions. We do not do well with uncomfortable situations. And one of the easiest things to do is to dismiss it as not that bad, to turn to the sunnier side of things, right? To say that, oh, it will happen. This is sometimes where the just relax, it will happen moment comes, because the listener doesn't know how to hold space and is uncomfortable with the fact that this is a very emotional, heavy thing, right? Like we talked about at the beginning. Infertility is something that impacts all of the person. It's their physical body, their emotional body, their spiritual body, their energetic body. It really infiltrates all of you. And we understand that. It's also something that a lot of expectations are created around. So especially when it comes to conversations with family, there can be a lot of expectations from family members around reproduction, around having babies, around building the family, right? And because of all of that, because of the expectations, because of the gravity of this, it can be painful. It can be emotional. It can be disappointing. It can be sad. And these are all emotions that oftentimes we are not taught how to manage and handle. And so one of the things that we do is we just dismiss it. And this sounds like, oh, it will happen. Or just give it time, keep trying, or just something quick like, oh, I'm sorry, that sounds really hard. And dismissing somebody's story can be super damaging, because what that is communicating back is that what you're telling me is not important. Even though if that's not what you mean, that is oftentimes what is communicated. Instead of dismissing with a quick comment to end that conversation quickly because it feels uncomfortable, I really encourage you to just keep listening. And this is what we mean when we say hold space for. When we hold space for someone, that's literally what you're doing, is just creating a space in which they are safe to share their story. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to end the conversation for them. They'll end it when they want to. You don't need to dismiss it with a happy comment. It doesn't need to be happy. It's okay that it's hard. It's okay that it's sad. And it's okay to just listen. At the end of this episode, I will share with you what to say. But even if you don't have anything to say, you can just hold the space, and that just looks like listening, which is really hard to do. But I will say, the more that you practice listening, and you can practice listening in any situation, it doesn't have to be during this hard conversation, but the more that you practice just listening and not responding, the easier it gets. That brings me to the third thing I wish people knew is do not tell them a story. Just don't do it. Do not tell them a story. Do not tell them your story. Do not tell them the story about somebody you know who went through infertility. Do not tell them the story about your neighbor who went through infertility. I don't want to know about your friend's daughter. I don't want to know about your coworker. I do not want to know about anybody else's experience with this really hard thing right now, unless I ask. So if somebody is sharing their story with you and you have this urge to make them feel, this is why people do this, you want to make them feel like they're not alone. So you want to share about your friend who also did IVF and this is what happened with them. Don't do that. Don't do that. And here's why. Although in a lot of interpersonal communication situations, having other stories is a way in which we help each other not feel so alone. It's a way in which we can offer context or offer comparisons or offer other ways of doing things or offer ideas, right? Like there's a lot of reasons why we might share other stories. But when it comes to infertility, there's a couple problems with doing that. One, this is a very intimate subject. It's already really hard to talk about usually. And so layering on top of that somebody else's hard time does not help. It just adds to the hard timeness. Also, infertility is a very unique experience for every couple. Although it is about the same thing, it is very different. Every body is different. Every couple's needs are unique. Everyone's experience with it is different. There's not one cure for infertility because of this. And it's a very complicated problem. There's a lot that goes into figuring out why a couple isn't getting pregnant. So you sharing a story of somebody else is, I would say statistically, very low chance of you solving the problem for them. So sometimes we share stories to help bring clarity or an example of, but statistically speaking, somebody else's experience is not going to help your friend's experience because infertility is so complex. And the big asterisk here is unless they ask. Because if you are sharing your fertility story, you might get to a place where other people's stories are helpful. And that's a beautiful place to be. And you can ask for that. You have the power to say, this is my story. Do you know of anybody who also has gone through this? I would love to know more people's stories. And you can seek that out. And it can be very helpful. When I was going through infertility, I got to that place. I wanted to know what other people did because I couldn't figure out any answers for myself. And so I would ask people, hey, do you know anybody? And then there came a time where I was over that. And I was like, okay, I don't want anybody else's stories. And that's okay too. So if you are the person sharing the story, sharing your experience with infertility, then you have the power to ask for stories. But if you are on the listening end, do not offer the stories unless asked. And I have one more thing for you on the do nots before we get into the do's. So one more thing not to do is to ask probing questions. This one gets a little cloudy, and I understand why. When we are trying to be a good friend or we have a really close relationship with someone where there's a history of really going deep with that person and kind of sharing all the secrets with that person, you might be used to, or you might be in a communication pattern of asking probing questions because that's the level that you're on. And so you might want to know all the nitty-gritty details. You might start asking about, how long has it been? How long have you been trying? What have you tried so far? Has he been tested? Have you been tested, right? Like all of these questions, you want to know all the dirty details. This conversation is not the time for that. I remember vividly my mom having a really hard time with me not giving her the details. And she would say, "Oh, but we're just so close. Our relationship is just so close. We're so close." And I'm like, that is not a reason for me to share things that I am not comfortable sharing yet. Because the reality is, there's a lot of confusion in infertility. And sometimes the person might not have all of the answers yet, or they might not understand for themselves what the problem is yet, or they might not have the results from the test that you're asking about, or they have the results and they haven't processed it yet themselves to be able to share it with you. And if they are forced because they feel a loyalty to you and they are forced to share before they're ready, that can be super damaging on all kinds of levels. Later, they might feel guilty. They might feel like they violated something with their partner because them and their partner decided not to share that deeply with people. But then with you, you asked all these probing questions and then they shared too much and now they feel guilty. That's one scenario that can happen. So in this, it doesn't matter how close you are. It doesn't matter how much they can trust you, whatever the excuse is. Do not ask probing questions. Just don't. Your job is to listen and allow them to share as much as they are ready to share in that moment. Because likely, if somebody's sharing about their fertility journey with you, this is not the last time that they will be sharing about their fertility journey with you. It is a journey. This is not a one conversation that you're having. This is likely going to be a couple conversations over time. And so there's no need to probe to get to the bottom of, because there will be more, right? And you can trust and just breathe into that, knowing that if you're creating a safe space for your friend to share, they will likely come back to you later at some point to share more. You don't got to get it all right now. Okay. So now that we know what not to do, let's talk about what to do when it comes to talking to somebody about their fertility journey. So if a friend or a family member trusts you enough to share about their experience with you, to share what they're going through, they've opened up, maybe a little bit, maybe a lot, the best thing to do is to listen. You just listen. And that literally looks like just not talking. And I know the awkward silence can feel really long for someone who's listening. But likely it's not long for the person sharing because they're probably going in their mind through all the different things, and just giving them the time and the space that they need to articulate what they're trying to tell you can be such a gift. And I'm sure you've had this experience. When you share a problem with someone, a lot of the times you get so much clarity out of just saying the thing out loud. A lot of times we just feel better just getting it out of our body. There is research to show that emotions just need to be heard in a safe and trusting conversation. And if you can share an emotion with someone that you feel safe with, that's all that emotion needs to get out of the body. So there is a lot of healing that can happen in just having a safe space to share. And then once you've done a really good job listening, the only thing you can say is, tell me more. Tell me more. You just keep saying that. Tell me more. 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 I want you to tell me more. Don't say that part. Just say tell me more, right? What tell me more does is it gives an opportunity for the person speaking to go more in depth if they choose to. It is not a probing question. A probing question would be, tell me more about something specific. Tell me more about the tests you've had. Tell me more about how long you've been trying. Don't go there. Just keep it open with, tell me more. And that's all you say, is just tell me more. Now, at the end of the conversation, when the person, if you say, tell me more, and they don't have anything else to tell you, and the conversation is wrapping up, then what you say is something of support and an open door. And what I mean is, something of support looks like, thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for sharing that with me. It means so much that you trust me with that information. That's all you have to say, right? And then the open door is, I am here for you. When you're ready to share more, I am all ears. And end it there. What we tend to do after that, after we've given some gratitude and left an open door, is we tend to then try and fill in the blank, right? Solve the problem. We try to make it better. Avoid doing that. Don't do that. You do not need to make it better. You do not need to solve the problem. As the listener and as the friend or the family member, it is not your job to take this pain away. All your job is to hold space for that person. And I know that that can be so hard, especially when it's somebody that you care about so deeply and it's really hard to see them struggling with something. It can be like you just want to help them. Know that just by creating a safe, open space for them to come and share is helping them. Even if they can't articulate that in the moment, it is helpful. And then what else can you do? So say you've had this conversation with your friend or family and you listened, you said, tell me more. And then at the end of the conversation, you said, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I know this is really hard for you right now. I am here for you. When you're ready to share more, please share with me. Then some other things you can do to help support your friend is learn more. If you're not familiar with infertility and all that that means, do some research, get familiar with it so that you have a better understanding of what your friend might be going through. Don't send them any articles that you find. Please don't do that. But just educate yourself, right? You might want to follow some fertility accounts or other fertility doctors to kind of get a sense of what's going on in the fertility world and be more in the know so that the next time you have the conversation, you can be more confident in understanding the information your friend is telling you. Another thing you can do is offer support. And what that looks like is reaching out to that friend to set up a coffee date or reaching out to that friend to set up a date to go to a yoga class. Checking in with them can mean so much on the fertility journey because, again, this is a journey. It is long for some people. And when you're in it, it can often feel like your social life gets real weird. By having a friend that checks in with you, it takes the responsibility off and they still have someone that cares about them. A final thought, if you are really trying to support someone, is gifting them support. So whether that's gifting them a fertility doula session or gifting them a fertility Reiki session are wonderful, thoughtful gifts that are going to support them on their fertility journey and help their body and their well-being from a place of love and support. I've worked with clients where somebody that really cares about them gifts them a fertility doula session. And it's always so beautiful because they feel so loved and so supported. And then they're able to get added support from me in doing my fertility doula work. And it can really help that person not feel so alone on their journey. If this episode resonates with you, if you learned something, please share it. Nobody will know these things unless we start to talk about them more. So take this episode, share it on your social media. You can tag me at Fertility Jess. And if you have any questions, please send me a DM on Instagram at FertilityJess. I respond to all of my messages. It's me that you'll get the response from, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Her Fertility podcast. In a sea of big name podcasts, your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the show, I would so appreciate your support by leaving a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, wherever you listen, to help me reach as many women as possible. You can also share this episode with a friend. Sharing the podcast is the best way to help it grow and build a community of support around you on your fertility journey. If we aren't already connected, please find me at FertilityJess on social media or sign up for one of my next fertility courses or offerings at fertilityjess.com.